Okay, so I'm Marge Malpedie. I am the editor of LearningWell magazine, and we are going to have a panel of folks who have been featured in LearningWell, and they're going to come and tell their stories, and now their furniture is coming. So I'd like to call to the stage Dr. Nicola Blake, Dr. Tom Katsilas, Dr. Mike McGee, and Dr. Samantha Smith. Lots of doctors in this room. Hey, Tom.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Come on up.
Give me 10 minutes to walk back and forth, and I'll be ready to go.
Thanks for coming. Oh, yeah, you need a little more time. You and your friend Rick have a similar situation. He might come on in.
10 minutes of exercise will be a bit sharper.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really tough to follow that. Although I will promise you, we're not going to make you get out of your seats, so you can languish for a little bit, right? Well, that's not true, but I can't tell. Oh, the slide is up, good. So you'll notice the LearningWell slide has the QR code. So this is going to be up the entire time, so please click your phone to it, and then if you're not already subscribed to our list, then you will be. So a little bit about LearningWell first, and then we'll get into these terrific people's stories. So we created LearningWell to explore the intersection between higher education and lifelong well-being. Our hope is that it fills a void in reporting on these issues, and it creates a learning community of ideas, energy, and inspiration. A lot of the good words we heard there on Wendy's example. So we are now solely published by the Coalition, and we are an independent magazine. We're not a peer-reviewed journal, we're a magazine, but we are advised by our Coalition members who, what do we call it, Rick? An arm's length advisor relationship, and an incredibly productive one, so I want to thank you for that. We also have a terrific editorial board. So if you go to our website about us, you can see all of the people that are helping advise this great work. So, I also wanted to thank our staff. Dana Humphrey, who is, I don't know, so many things. I don't know how many titles you have, Dana, but Dana is also the managing editor of LearningWell. Ella Schmidt, who just doubles as, well, what are you now? You're an event planner, marketing person, and an amazing reporter and writer. So you'll see Ella's work in LearningWell as well. So we have a number of really great freelance writers and producers as well, and a couple of new features you might have seen. If you are getting our regular emails, on Tuesday you'll get the LearningWell newsletter, and on Thursday you'll get something called the Weekly Well, which is a news digest of stories that appeared that previous week on the intersection of higher education and well-being. So you see a lot of what you normally would read every day, we sort of aggregate that for you and send it to you right into your email. So we started in July of last year. You guys hopefully got the annual issue that we did. We'll do another one next January and send that to you. So our panel today are big thinkers and doers. And I had covered them in LearningWell because of what you will soon learn of the accomplishments and interesting stories they have. All of them have been featured. Mike McGee is the president of Minerva University, and we're just in the middle of actually doing interviews with Mike. So I'd like to introduce the panel and ask them to tell their own stories and sort of bring LearningWell to life for you, and then give you an opportunity to ask them questions. So Dr. Nicola Blake is the interim provost and vice president of academic affairs at the Stella and Charles Gutman Community College in New York City. Dr. Blake is a seasoned higher education leader with 23 years of experience. She played a pivotal role in launching and shaping Gutman Community College, New York's first new community college committed to student-centered, equity-driven education. She notably improved retention and graduation rates and is currently driving the transformation of Gutman's academic landscape. Welcome, Dr. Blake.
Good morning, everyone. It's so great to see some familiar faces. I'm going to try that exercise affirmation thing in my next Senate meeting and see if it works. I don't know. Maybe we'll move from tired to happy, and then we'll come to some kind of consensus in that meeting. I'll make sure that there's not too much of that, though. I'll try to find something more common. But that was so great. So my name is Nicola Blake, and I had the great opportunity to be part of a small group of faculty members who founded a college. So it's really unusual to have living folk who can talk about the idea of taking a concept paper and founding a new community college in New York City. So, I wear that badge, with honor. There's a lot of scars under this jacket to do this work, but it really builds on some of the work that all of you are doing in this room in terms of removing barriers for students. What makes the new community college, now the Stella and Charles Gutman Community College, special is we've tried to take some of the best practices in higher ed and put it in one space where we've required in the early years, and it changed a little bit, and I'll talk about that, mandatory full-time for all students, learning communities for a year for all students, embedded advising, so an advisor is given a cohort that they stay with for an entire year. That advisor meets with the faculty member once a week. So the faculty members in the learning team are released, in addition to teaching their courses, to meet once a week to talk about each student holistically, which is really connected to some of the things that I like best about LearningWell's approach to highlighting good practice. Because LearningWell is featuring the whole student experience, and Gutman was trying to institute things where we would have a 360 view of each student so that we can triage and mitigate some of the issues that come up during the journey to completion. We essentially wanted to disrupt the graduation and retention rate in community college education. We managed to disrupt it. However, the pandemic managed to disrupt some of our outcomes in terms of the gains that we've seen. We had clear pathways in terms of, not restricted, but a finite numbers of majors and clear pathways to ensure that all students were accruing up to 30 credits in the first year. We had the unusual, we call it the 12-6 calendar. So we had 4 sessions per academic year versus many of you have 2 sessions per year, and many of you have the winter session as kind of, you can take a course or not, and then summer is optional. No, all our billable credit hours for federal aid are across 4 sessions because we really wanted to see the students leave within 2 years. One of the most unique pieces of the model, and something that LearningWell magazine featured, was a focus on work in the curriculum. So we have this amazing course called Ethnographies of Work, and I can Google it, or I can send you some information, and I can send you the syllabi. I know Bunker Hill has done some really good work with that course, and another institution in New Jersey also adopted pieces of the course. FIU is also adopting pieces of that course. But what that course does is a required course. It allows students to spend a semester. Before, when we opened, it was 2 semesters. Now it's a semester to think about the world of work. And why is that important? Most of our time, unfortunately, is spent in a job or in a career, and most of our adulthood, going to adulthood, you're talking to your kid, you're like, what are you gonna be? How are you gonna manifest this? This is the track, this is what you should do in college. But then no one gives us the tools and equipment to think of work as an ecosystem, a place where you have to navigate relationships, a place where you have to navigate systemic racism, a place where you have to navigate gender inequality, a place where you have to navigate pay equity. So we're equipping students with a degree, but we're not saying to them, how do you unpack in terms of political or the anthropological or sociological, it's early, views around theories of work. Why do you join a union or not? How do you understand an org chart? How do you look at a mission statement on the web and then enter into a culture in an environment where the mission statement is ad hoc with what you're feeling or experiencing as an intern or someone in work? Also, is work an idea of privilege? Is career an idea of privilege? Can you really get joy from career in terms of if you're doing, if you're a working class person and you're heading to work to make ends meet in an expensive city, is that necessarily joyous? Or have you leaned into your talent? If you're a new immigrant, what does that look like? And how do we have this generational conversation around work with students who needs to be equipped with the different types of skills to navigate those spaces that we're training them up to say, take your place in the world of work, when it's fraught with all types of nuances that they have to mitigate as young people. So we've spent a lot of time with this course. It has been truly beneficial to students. We, have doubled the graduation rate pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic occurred. So in terms of the pandemic, what we're seeing as a new college and a small college with amazing faculty, hardworking staff, software that connects all the student support services, we've seen an increased rate of disengagement. And we're trying to figure out what is the mitigating factor why students seem a little bit more disengaged post-pandemic than pre-pandemic. And that's something that we're grappling with on campus. Students want to be engaged. Some students come to class and there's the competing priorities of employment. There is the wellness piece in terms of post-pandemic trauma around health. There's also mental health increase. There's also this idea that, which is, it's kind of good and not so good at the same time. I've lived online in this virtual space for a couple of years in terms of high school. Maybe I should go virtual fully in college because now I'm having a difficulty connecting. Or maybe I'm in college in the campus space and there's a social event, but I really would have just preferred to have that work fair online and on Zoom. And the whole idea of a work fair is for you to be in person with your employer. So trying to figure out new ways of being, and also new ways of being in a city, situating, brown bodies in a space that's also safe, based on some of the political conversations that were also happening during the pandemic. So it's a audacious school, it's a powerful school. It has created spaces for students to become, and created spaces for students to think about equity and social justice. And now, as a faculty and staff group, we are trying to dig into how do we advance the gaps that we see are opening based on the students who were most harmed during the pandemic.
Wow. So you can see how it was a great privilege to write this story. The Gutman Community College story and working with Nicola was one of the first ones we did. It was actually in the first issue of LearningWell, and taught me a lot of things. First of all, I have the best job in America because it was so fun to be there that day. But it also reminded me how important it is to actually go and experience on-site. It really was amazing, and it was an amazing day for me. I learned so much. I met so many wonderful people, and she is here today. So we're gonna have, I'm sure, many questions for Dr. Blake. I think I'll move on to Mike. So Mike McGee is the president of Minerva University. Prior to joining Minerva, he was founding CEO of Chiefs for Change, a nonprofit organization supporting leaders of many of the nation's largest and most innovative K-12 public education systems. Previously, Mike co-founded and was CEO of Rhode Island Mayoral Academies, REMA, a statewide network of regional, racially, and economically diverse public schools, while successfully advocating for sweeping change to state education policies, one of the missions there. Before starting REMA, Mike taught American literature and philosophy for a decade at Haverford College, Wheaton College, and the Rhode Island School of Design. 2024, his book, Emancipating Pragmatism, won the Elizabeth Agee Prize in American Studies. He is a Pahara Aspen Education Fellow and he holds a PhD in English from the University of Pennsylvania, a bachelor's in political science and English from the College of Holy Cross. Mike, my first question for you is, which you probably get all the time. We had a great interview a couple weeks ago, and I've since talked to your Dean of Students. It's just going to be so fun to write this piece. So you have been named the most innovative college in the country, and you're here to tell us why.
Well, thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. Before I talk a little bit about that, I just want to, first of all, thank Dean Suzuki for your presentation, which I thought was spectacular, and also just underscore everything that you said. When I was about 44, I'm about to turn 53, I had completely run myself into the ground and transformed everything I do when it comes to sleep, nutrition, exercise, breathing. And it absolutely changed my life in the most positive way. So I couldn't encourage all of you more to just follow the advice you heard this morning. It'll make an enormous difference in your life if you feel like you need one. Minerva University, I'll just quickly say a little bit about how I got here. I became president of Minerva University almost just about 2 years ago now. And I'd grown up in North Carolina and gone to North Carolina public schools during the heyday of integration, this kind of brief window when integration was actually happening in the American South, had a profound and profoundly positive impact on me as a child, and one that I never forgot, and has really informed my work. I started out as an academic writing about language and social change from the anti-slavery movement to the civil rights movement. And then in 2007, had a really unique opportunity to be involved with a small group of people in launching new racially and economically diverse public schools in Rhode Island. At that time, creating those kind of schools, whether you were a traditional school district or a new public school, was actually illegal. So we had to pass a law that would allow us to, or that would allow young people from different racial and economic backgrounds across Rhode Island to go to school together. And we were able to do that. All three of my daughters have grown up attending those public schools. It's been so great for them. So I mention all of that just to say this is the kind of passion that has informed my career choices all along the way. And Minerva is actually doing this thing that I'm quite passionate about, bringing young people together across all kinds of different lines of racial and economic and cultural difference on a global scale. We are a 10-year-old university, independent and US accredited, but only about 15% of our students are US students. We have students and alumni from 100 nations, and we bring them into community with one another in small cohorts of about 200 students. And in any one of those 200 student cohorts, we will have students from 40 or 50 different nations. And they live and learn together. And they do that first in San Francisco. So their experience in that first year is they're living in San Francisco together in residency halls that are our residency halls. And we're very intentionally teaching them how to live together across all of these lines of difference, how to create a sense of belonging, how to create mutual understanding and participate in civil discourse. All of that is done with a great deal of intention at Minerva University. And then they're having a global living and learning experiences. So after that first year, where they're learning all of those life skills, and they're also all taking our interdisciplinary core curriculum, they are then living together in our residency halls in cities like Berlin, Buenos Aires, Hyderabad, London, Seoul, Taipei, where they are having not only culturally immersive experiences, but where they are engaged in our project-based learning curriculum in all of those places, designed to take full advantage of the vibrant economies and cultures of those different cities around the world. So what does that look like? If you're a student who's interested in energy sustainability, for instance, and is taking our sustainability degree, you're going to be taking live, synchronous, small seminar classes associated with that degree from wherever you are in the world with classmates from all over the world. So that's our core classroom experience. It's very intimate. It's astonishing to me how the way our students and our faculty talk about the strong relationships that they build in a virtual setting, but they really do. I think some of that has to do with size. Like all of our seminar classes are no more than 20 students. We don't do anything asynchronously. It's all a live experience for our students. And then they are immediately taking all the knowledge and skills that they're building in classes and applying it to complex projects. So in that sustainability space, again, if you're studying energy sustainability, you're gonna have a project that we have designed with you and for you in Seoul that looks very different than the project you might tackle in Buenos Aires, and is taking an example of what those different cities have to offer. And it's all designed to culminate in a 2-year complex project of your own choosing and making as you move towards graduation. So there's really 3 innovations at Minerva that I think have led us to be known as one of the more innovative universities in the world. It's this global cultural experience, really designed to kind of build all the muscles of mutual understanding and civil discourse and diplomacy. So it's that for sure. It's what we've been able to do to leverage technology to create learn anywhere classroom experiences. And I should say also with a very intentional and specific pedagogy. So all of our faculty are trained in an active learning pedagogy that we've designed for small virtual seminars. Without exception, there's a kind of extraordinary level of consistency in what we do pedagogically. And then project-based learning, and I should say experiential learning that I think we do exceptionally well. We are very small. We have just over 100 undergraduate students right now. There's a few things we do that will break as we scale and will have to be redesigned. But I'm incredibly optimistic about our ability to scale to about 3,000 undergraduates, which is our plan, in the context of a university where we will also be growing graduate programming and other programming.
Thank you, Mike. One of the threads that we look for in LearningWell is how all of these different stories and experiences impact student well-being. So we'll kind of unpack that in a little bit with you, Mike, because we had a great conversation about that. In fact, one of the other things I wanted to mention when I thought about creating this panel and who was coming is that, so Gutman Community College and Minerva on paper seem like extremely different institutions, but the two of you have much in common. And one of the things we're doing in creating a learning community is hoping that, you know, the best practice sharing will lead to some advice and collaboration. So when we thought, one of the questions I asked both of you, you can talk about it offline, but I thought was interesting, is how to, in your case, Nicola, recreate, in your case, Mike, is to create from scratch the high impact experiential learning kinds of experiences with an online platform. So anyway, we can get into that another time, but I think, again, it was one of the common questions I asked both of these leaders in very different learning environments. So it's just one of the kind of cool things about this reporting. So next, we have 4 different sections, or no, it's 5, to the magazine: flourishing, teaching and learning, mental health, access and inclusion, and then we have a perspectives page. So our next 2 guests actually were authors of op-eds, which is great. And by the way, big push to do more on the perspectives page. So I think I've probably nagged everybody in this room. If you have an idea, an opinion that you want to share with others, please look at our perspectives page because we're looking for more comment from a diverse array of folks. So I think I'll start with you, Dr. Smith. So where is your bio? Here we go. So Dr. Samantha Smith is the Director of Health Promotion at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Prior to UMBC, she worked with the United States Army Public Health Center. At APCH, Dr. Smith was responsible for developing tools, to access nutrition environments. Her areas of expertise are in public health program development, health education, and program assessment and evaluation. She has a professional and personal commitment to eliminating health disparities and supporting health equity. Dr. Smith has a PhD in behavioral and community health from the University of Maryland, College Park, a master's of public health from Emory University, and a BS in human biology from the University of Texas at Austin. So we asked Dr. Smith to, again, full disclosure, I reached out and because we had known Sam earlier from some work that she was doing in her dissertation when she was getting her doctorate on the emotional impact of the Black Lives Matter movement on the protesters themselves, which was a fascinating subject. And we had done some previous conversations about that. And then, you know, after the fall and the conflict in the Middle East, there was an awful lot of content to unpack around this issue. So we reached out again to Sam to see if she would write about what the impact of protest is on emotional and behavioral health of students who are actively involved in those. Doctor.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. So as I was sitting here listening to my co-panelists, I was like, I want to work at Gutman and I want to attend school at Minerva. And I'm sure my family would say, what other degree would you like to get at this point? But thank you, Marge, for this opportunity. So just a little bit about the research that informed the op-ed is, I was completing my dissertation research and just had what we call like a historical alignment of the moment. And so, unfortunately, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery had just died on U.S. soil as it related to racially motivated killings. And so we were also facing the COVID-19 pandemic at the same time. And so as I was working on my qualifying exams and all the things that were going on, I knew that I wanted to tap into a part of public health that we don't normally tap into, which is sociology. Oftentimes when we're trying to think through health equity or eliminating health disparities, we, as public health practitioners and researchers, I will speak on behalf of all of us, is that sometimes we can forget about the social concepts that are actually impacting health. When I talk to my students in my classes, I tell them health happens in us, to us, and around us. And so we cannot divorce ourselves from the idea of the sociological impact of health and well-being. And so we talk about in public health that racism is a public health issue, but we don't see many researchers think about how do we practically begin to address eliminating racism or discrimination or oppression from the public health perspective. And so I chose to think about, you know, what can we do using sociological tools to answer public health questions that are really sociological questions. It was a whole like layered thinking of question back and forth. But as I sat at home working, and I saw young people, not only on our campuses, but also around the world, decide to push themselves beyond a pathogen that they didn't know anything about, because they saw and they felt compelled to stand up for someone that they did not know who had lost their life, in a long string of people who had lost their lives over centuries. And so I wanted to understand, when do we push past our individual self for the collective advancement of our population, which is actually how we advance justice. When we think about communities and we come together on behalf of each other, even if it's just one person, that way we can then move the needle forward. And so when I was collecting my research, or formulating my questions, I was thinking through, what was that experience? What was the switch in the mind that says, I don't care, the hospitalization rates are through the roof, my people around me, I'm in an intergenerational home, like what is the shift in the mind? And why I particularly looked at young people is that young people, college students, have a long history of changing the world. Many of you in this room might have said when you were in college, participated in a protest, a sit-in, a demonstration, donated something, did something to say, I want to see the world be better. And so also young adults have a high propensity for risk-taking. Protesting is risky. So there's the risk of clashes with anti-protesters, there's the risk of arrest, there's the risk of injury in some cases where things might become chaotic. And so thinking through, wanting to understand more of the mindset of the people who are gonna protest most likely. Also, people who protest as college students are more likely to become change agents as adults. And there's an actual generational arch of protesting or social justice participation from young adulthood into adulthood. And then also next generations will then take on the idea of, this is what we do. This is something that my family does. And actually, I join my family by also being a protester, by also being a social advocate, something like that. And so this research, I wanted to understand more about the mind switch shift, but what I ended up discovering was actually residency in the body where protest actually impacts mental well-being. And so oftentimes on college campuses, we talk about the negative impacts of emotions, and so we say we want to lower anxiety. There's good anxiety. We want to lower depression. We want to lower those things. We don't spend a lot of time telling people, how do we cultivate belonging beyond social connection? How do we cultivate empowerment? How do we cultivate hope? How do we cultivate happiness? Because those are actually things we want to fill our students with. We don't want to just deplete them of things. We want to also fill them with other things and also show them how to continue to fill them on their own outside of our institutions and across their life course. So I was, talking with students and conducting interviews, and what I found was that the actual mechanisms of protesting are what led to the houses of positive emotional experiences. So the experience of being with people who are of the same mindset, that was belonging for some students. Also being able to shout and chant and give and say what they felt out loud about what was happening around them, that also helped them to feel empowered. Listening to protest marches, to speakers, musicians, other things like that, provided co-curricular education for them around social justice topics that they were not familiar with. Because the study group was a broad range of people. They weren't just Black identified students. These were students across different ethnic groups, also across different gender identities, sexual orientations. And so it created a learning experience. And so after completing that work at UMBC, my goal was to bring the paper and bring the papers into life. My research focus is that we don't just lock things up for other researchers to read them. We need to get them into the hands of the people doing the work so that we can actually see it work. And so when I wrote the piece about Let Them Scream, my goal was to help institutions to understand that actually allowing student protests to organically develop and mature across your campus is not an antithesis to the ideals that we want our students to have. We want them to belong, we want them to feel empowered, we want them to experience hope. And when we silence their ability to protest, we then silence some of the ways in which our students will do the things or experience the positive things that we want them to have. And so we can experience, thank you, we can hold both things at the same time. What I tell my students, I developed a class based on the research work, is I give them a call to action afterwards. Do something to change this world for the better. But I tell them two truths will exist at the same time. You are seeking to advance justice, and there are systems that are still around us that we have to operate within. And so we have to all be willing to accept the responsibility that it takes to see the world be different while the world is still currently as it is. And so my goal was for also administrators to not see protest as deviant. And that's why I said some of you were protesters. Some of our administrators forget that they were running across campuses, like, tearing stuff up or taking over offices. And so I tell them, look how you have become an agent of change. Think about if you silence the next generation to do that, how will our campuses not look like Gutman, how they might not look like Minerva in the future?
Thanks. So Dr. Smith's work with LearningWell is, they're tough shoes to fill, because one of the things that we did when we started the magazine is we explicitly asked for the research community to think about how their work might be more widely distributed in a magazine like LearningWell. So again, another pitch to all of you, and I can't think of a better example than Dr. Smith's work with us, so thank you. So now we're on to Tom. Many of you probably know Tom Katsilas. Tom Katsilas is the former president of the University of Connecticut, former provost at the University of Virginia, and former dean of engineering at Duke. He has a PhD in physics from UCLA after beginning his educational trajectory at Santa Monica Community College. Good. He has been working with the CTE and others for years now to create national education initiatives. And he's going to talk a little bit about how he did that at UConn, which is a leading institution in this area. But so Tom gave an op-ed around, I'm just trying to think about, it was also very timely. I think it was around the time Paul Tough was telling us all about the declining value of higher education.
Right.
And what Tom really wanted to talk about is how your observation was that there was very little inclusion of the value of well-being, which we're talking about here, as part of the education experience. And so Tom wrote a great piece for us for LearningWell, and I'm going to ask him about that. And also, Tom, if you don't mind, because of your experience as a college leader implementing transformational education on your campus, talk a little bit about that too.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Margie, although no thank you for not only following Wendy, but I have to follow Wendy, Nicola, Mike, and Sam. I think it's even worse. Yeah. So good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. We heard a lot yesterday about the loss of faith of the American public in higher education. And the reasons for that are complex. But if you dig in a little bit, the most often cited reasons given by people answering these surveys is, number one, it's too expensive. And number two, there isn't enough payoff in terms of career opportunity. And Paul Tough talked about that a little bit last night with the college premium, which shows there is a benefit, but it's not evenly distributed. So as a result of that, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that people receive college educations, but then go on to what Clayton Spencer called as the barista meme, where they don't get the reward. So this is the traditional liberal arts education has been focused on primarily critical thinking and identity, helping students discover who they are and their place in the world. And that is still extremely valuable, but it's not enough. And this coalition is aimed at a paradigm shift in education, going from identity as the primary purpose of liberal arts to identity, agency, and purpose. So we've heard a lot about that, but I want to take just a minute to talk about each word a little bit more. So looking at identity, helping students discover who they are and their place in the world, through this coalition is expanding to be not just in the world, but in the tribe, as you heard yesterday, which is really bringing identity and belonging into the fore. The second thing is agency. So agency is synonymous in some sense with empowerment. And if you will, I would say that's antithetical to hopelessness. So when Angela said yesterday, rush off in pursuit of hopefulness, I would say she could also have said rush off in pursuit of agency, because if you do, hopefulness will follow. And the third part is purpose, and that is the motivation to take this new power that you have from your education and apply it to the greater good. And I would say that is the antidote for the languishing that Corey Keyes talked about. It's not surprising when you think about these words a little deeper like this, that they correlate so strongly with long-term career engagement and long-term well-being. So this is the ROI, and that's what I was arguing in the op-ed, that this is the ROI for society, the career engagement, but also for parents and students through both career engagement and lifelong well-being. And since this is a session on well-being, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. At UConn, just as at all of your institutions, there's a mental health crisis with a demand for counseling services that far exceeds any ability of any of us to meet or supply. Of course, the mental health services are important, but they're also a reactive response, whereas life transformative education provides a proactive approach to well-being, and it brings well-being into the academic mission, interweaving student and academic affairs. And so I want to adapt a quote from Ellie Doherty, who's sitting in the back here. She is the Vice President for Student Affairs here at Georgetown, but she was Dean of Students with me at University of Connecticut. And she was fond of saying that learning shouldn't stop when students leave the classroom door. And my answer to that was, well-being support shouldn't stop when you enter. Yeah. And I think that's what this is all about. So that's my pitch on that. But you asked also about my experience as president introducing life transformative education. And when I came in as president at Connecticut, I had very, very focused priorities. And one of 3 of those priorities was to challenge the faculty to think about how to bring this type of education to every student at scale. And you know, a lot of people have asked me, well, what kind of a response did you get? And what lessons did you learn? So I thought for this audience, I would share a little bit of that with you. You know, the first thing I would say for a president or senior leader or provost trying to bring this as a top-down approach is to listen to the narrative that is present at that particular institution. So here at Georgetown, the narrative I've heard is this concern for whole student growth, right, and whole student development. So that's the narrative that, you know, that one can tie into very effectively here and have with their programs on connecting life and learning. At UConn, the narrative, there was a great deal of pride in undergraduate teaching, in high graduation rates, in programs like Writing Across the Curriculum, which touched every student with a nationally renowned program on writing across the curriculum, plus a focused program that was not reaching every student, but they were very proud of on their honors program and the way that was done. So what I tried to do was tie into that, because the first response you get from faculty and staff is about life transformative education is, aren't we already doing this? And the answer is yes, we are. And then we talk about the dual mission, in this case of a public university, which is workforce development and human development. And so some units, we're doing the life transformative education pretty much as we describe it here in this group. So if you think about social work, nursing, they all had structured programs where they take learning from the classroom curriculum and apply it directly to authentic experiences with clients and emotionally supportive mentoring at times. Often engineering programs do those kinds of things. So it was not about creating a narrative for something completely new and different, but the challenge was to bring to them the data from research, from Gallup Purdue, among others, to show them these are the kinds of experiences that the research shows has an impact on transforming lives. We are giving those experiences and then confronting them with the data of what percentage of our students reported having those experiences, which is more like 10%. And so the challenge is not to do something different, but to figure out how to do it to reach every student. So the next question you get is, well, you know, what kind of resources will we get? And so don't skirt the issue on that. It is not nothing, and it's not everything. It's somewhere between nothing and sending everyone to a study abroad experience. We all know it's like 95% of people who have a study abroad experience are transformed, but it doesn't scale to 50,000 students at a school like UConn. So, you know, what you're thinking about is something that, you know, is about on the level of a strategic priority. This is why, if it's not a priority, you can't afford to do it. But a strategic plan with a priority is something like the 1% of, in this case, $1 billion budget. So $10 million a year is about the level. And with that, you can bring these kinds of deep experiences to each person, and you're not asking faculty to do it for nothing. Now, the next thing, getting the buy-in from senior leaders, the deans, the provosts and the deans were incredibly supportive. And what they decided to do was push it out and to the units, to the departments, and challenge the departments to think about how each of them could do it. And I would tell you that has advantages and disadvantages over the way University of Florida is trying with UF Quest through a core curriculum that's common and reaches every student. So each one has advantages and disadvantages. And I'll tell you, I'm a little bit lazy and a little bit impatient. So the advantage of doing it the way we did, pushing it down to the departments, is it's quicker, and it's a little easier because you're letting each unit come up with what makes sense for them. The downside of it is you'll get about half of the departments, about half of the faculty will see this as a checkbox exercise. So they will say, okay, the president wants us to do this, this, and this. They look at what they're already doing and they say, oh, we do that. Well, check, check, check. Tell the president we're doing life transformative education. But half of them will really dig deeply into it. And I saw this in one of my own home departments, which was physics, because they didn't know it, but I was still on their group mailing list. And so they were saying candid things about the president and his crazy idea. And the department chair was kind of calming them down. So the conversation went something like, look, what are we supposed to do to connect our students to real world situations? Somebody said, well, research. I said, well, we do, maybe 20% of our students can do research, but what do we do with the other 80%? So people were like, this is impossible. We can't get 100% of our students to do research. And then somebody said, well, maybe they don't all have to do research. Maybe we can get to 25 or 30 with research, and maybe we can do something else that connects them to, maybe public policy internships, or maybe public education projects that they take what they've learned in the classroom and use it to communicate through a museum exhibit or a star party for the public or something. So they started brainstorming, and it started to become productive. And the key was having a department chair who was willing to sort of push back gently on the faculty. And then there were advances that took place not on a department level, but on an individual level. And I wanted to just share one of my favorites with you. There was we have a program in women's and gender studies, and there was a course being taught on the history of civil activism, really largely around the civil rights movement. And it included principles of activism and effective activism. And the professor for this class decided to give to the students a semester project assignment, say, apply this to some real world situation. And they chose, I think, women and gender studies, she might have thought it was going to be something on campus related to equity issues. What a group of students decided was to apply those principles of activism to a neighboring community that was suffering greatly from the opioid epidemic. And so they partnered with local institutions, health and safety organizations, to partner with them and to bring about a change of behavior, which is what activism is really about. And I thought that was a really nice example of connecting the two on a just individual level. So I think this thing, it has legs. I'm no longer president. A new president has different priorities. So as a branded initiative, it no longer exists, except with it as an activity within the provost's office. And yet, you see a difference in the attitude of faculty and staff who really see themselves less as in the business of conferring degrees. And I would say to a person, I hear people say, we're in the business of transforming lives.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tom. So Tom, Nicola, Samantha, and Mike are great examples of the kind of people that we get within this learning community. So I'm so glad that you came and shared your stories. So naturally, I have a bunch of questions, but I'm looking at Dana. I'm thinking that we will open it up for audience questions. Thank you. Now I get to sit down. audience questions? And any of the subjects, right? You guys are prepared for anything on either something that relates to all four of you or any of their specific individual stories. And if nobody raises their hand, I'm going in. I do have a question. Okay. So I always ask each of the people I interview eventually what the connection is around lifelong well-being, because that's basically what we were founded on in LearningWell. Mike, I might start with you. We talked about the type of individuals you hope to develop with this very unique pedagogy that you have. And you spoke about the very interesting connection between creating citizens of the world and how that impacts their individual well-being and also sort of the well-being of all of us. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I guess I'd just start with an observation, which is I feel like it's certainly in US culture, but in many cultures around the world, we're increasingly fear-based. And of course, fear is a powerful trigger of anxiety. So as we think about why are people so anxious, well, they're petrified half the time because of what they're reading in the New York Times, because they have so few opportunities in general to encounter and navigate people and communities that are different than themselves. So it's sort of a breeding ground for suspicion. Yeah. And so, you know, in our context, and as I mentioned before, we are leveraging technology to allow students to learn in online spaces. I'm much more interested in what technology can do to create learn anywhere opportunities than learn anytime opportunities. Because I think that if you can use technology to create spaces and opportunities for students to learn and be in community with each other across many different lines of difference, that's quite powerful. Learn anytime, if you're not careful, is sort of a recipe for alienation. It's like you're going to be in your room watching a recorded lecture or, you know, talking to a chatbot. I'm very focused on how do we create spaces where people have lots of opportunities to be in community and to create community across these sometimes very fraught lines of difference, and to build those muscles, and to build identity and a sense of agency around that. To say, like, I am a powerful connector, bridge builder. I am someone who knows how to engage in a way that will build my own and someone else's kind of mutual understanding. And we're doing this at Minerva in a very precarious environment in some ways. I mean, we have students from Russia and Ukraine. We have students from Israel and the West Bank. We have students from India and Pakistan who live sometimes in the same room together. So that's an awesome responsibility for us, I would say, as an institution. We better know how to do that well. But it also represents, I think, the promise of a place like Minerva University, because if you emerge from that community, you're going to emerge with a set of skills as a young leader that are really going to allow you to make a difference in the world. As president, I'm really thinking about how do we scale this, but how do we sort of double down on this particular institutional competency?
That's great. And I have to also add that you have a phenomenal head of counseling and well-being.
Yes, Will Meek, who leads all of our health and wellness work in student life, is here. And yes, I'm very, very grateful.
He's been a great colleague
for
of ours
Will's leadership.
Many years. Thank you. Nicola, I'm going to ask you about your community of caring. It's so palpable. at Gutman. And I mean, I was there, I witnessed this firsthand. It's the real deal. Every person I saw, it just sort of imbued this, we care about you. We talked a lot about that yesterday. It's not so easy to do on college campuses these days. Talk a little bit about how you did that.
I think the core was taking time to recruit and be honest about the type of work folks would be doing to start a new college or to build a new college. We really spent a lot of time in the interview processes trying to recruit the right folk, because the work is really intense, especially when you're trying to meet certain outcomes. We're a public college, which means we need federal and state dollars to do some of this work. But we really spent a lot of time trying to make sure we build up the accessibility office. We built up wellness. We built up the tutoring. We built up the peer mentors. So all of those support pieces, we spent a lot of time and care trying to build that out. But we also cleared the calendar to make space where everybody was talking to each other all the time. Sounds magical. It's problematic in terms of scalability and sustainability. And I'm looking at my colleague here at Minerva. As we evolved over 10 years, we have the same joy and intensity, but we're also, as all of you are, living in a moment of scarcity. Scarcity in terms of scarce resources. So what does it mean to move from 1,100 students to 2,500 students? What does it mean to have the secret sauce, I called it in the article in LearningWell, and make sure that secret sauce is also available to online students? Because when we opened 10 years ago, we didn't have online programs, and now we have online programs. So how do you have that feel online? Or if we're welcoming adult learners, I started by saying we only had first-time, full-time students out of DOE, Department of Education, 18-year-olds, and now we're welcoming adults. What does it mean to provide those same services to adults? So we are, as an institution, at a moment of inflection and pivot because we have limited amount of resources. We want to scale because we want to be viable in the system to make sure we have 3,000 students. But how do you do that at scale and still maintain the fact that, you know, in the first couple of years, I pretty much knew all the students, whereas now I know them less. You know, what does that mean? And how do you build a college, have these support staff take care of some very, very complicated issues, students going through some really tough times? How does the college take care of the staff? And how does the college take care of the faculty? That's something that we're also trying to figure out, which we never thought about 10 years ago. Because the burnout is real, being anxious is real, but we're also dealing with real issues right now in this decade. And what does that look like? And you know, I was smiling when you were talking. In grad school, I took a class called Dissent, Debate, Disorder. And I was like, Chris Chisholm, that class was so hard, but she was onto something to make space for that idea of dissent and debate. You know, but how do you do it in a caring way? I think we're all struggling with that.
Dana, how are we doing on time? Were we running over? Oh, okay. So, Wendy's got a question.
It's kind of a hard question, sorry. It's for Mike and Samantha. And I'm just curious from both of your perspectives, what can we learn from the current difficulties in the Middle East and all of that activism that's happening on our campus from the George Floyd things, and what can, and opposite, what are those lessons that we should be taking away, and what should we learn about the people in your dorms that are living together, and to scale that, which is always the hardest question.
So what I'll share quickly is that I think one thing that universities can take from this, and what a question that I told my institution not to try to answer, is don't try to solve the problem. I was like, one school is not going to solve a centuries-old issue where the truth is somewhere hundreds of years ago beyond us. But what we can do is use techniques like intercultural dialogue and restorative practices to help our students to have conversations with each other just to be heard. two truths are going to exist, especially when we have things like conflict. And it's not about telling the other side that they're wrong. It's about hearing them fully and accepting that their experience is both valid and honorable while yours is too. And so one of my colleagues who I work with often, Dr. Jasmine Lee, has this concept of radical love. And radical love means that we can exchange thoughts and ideas, even in opposition, while still practicing empathy with each other, while still saying that we care about each other, and still saying that when we leave this place, we're still gonna be on different sides of the issue. Because conflict isn't a bad thing. It's actually what pushes us forward to understand the world and change it. But when we do conflict with empathy and radical and revolutionary love, we then are able to see other people's stories in our advancement of justice.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. I mean, it's super hard. And I think sometimes when I speak in these types of contexts, I have a tendency to make it all sound easy. It's absolutely not. And I think one of the things that I did and that we did in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, for instance, was to just internally, not make an external statement, but internally to our community, acknowledge that the community was in a great deal of pain and that I didn't know what to do about it. Like, so I tried to be really candid about that I didn't have any answers in the immediate wake of what happened on October 7th. But that we were going to try to provide really robust supports to students who were struggling or in crisis or just needed to talk, and that we were going to try to stay true to the principles that our own community was grounded in, about not making anyone feel dehumanized or unsafe. And we tried to do what we could to maintain our own group identity, which I think is also quite important. I mean, one of the kind of wonderful things about universities, I think, is when they are able to create this really deep sense of belonging that is tribal, right? I mean, the kind of effervescent, sort of college sports oriented sense of identity, I think there are really positive aspects to that in the way that it fosters a sense of belonging, which does create those bubble bath effects, right? And so, our students call themselves Minervans. And
A little Star Trekky.
it is a little Star Trekky, but it's very, in a profound way, it really is a group identity, and it's this global group identity. You've signed up to be part of this extraordinarily diverse global community, doing this pretty difficult thing over 4 years together. And so I, as a leader, tried to sort of not lose track of what I sometimes think of as the summer camp dynamic that's really positive, and to say, okay, we're going to lean on this in these difficult times. And then the other thing I'd say is it was really clear to me that nothing that we do in these moments of geopolitical crisis that do affect us can be compulsory. We can't say to young people like, you right now have to be part of this community and this exercise to build belonging and empathy. I think that you run the risk of actually heightening the sense of fear and danger by taking that approach. So in the case of the conflict in Israel and Gaza, I can think of a number of different instances with students where they opted out of community activity because they weren't ready for it. And that's also okay.
I guess that we have run out of time, but I am so grateful. Oh,
No, go ahead.
Do you have another question? Well,
No, go right ahead.
I just wanted to say I'm so grateful for the work we've done on LearningWell, and so grateful for you sharing your stories today. You're all superstars. Thank you.